source of greatest, or the receptor of greatest concern is drinking water. So we focused on how do we clean up drinking water so that it's safe to drink, as opposed to focusing on trying to clean up a basin that you could in fact pump and fertilize in order to make it happen. So do you feel, it seems to me there's a slight difference in the kind of information that you need to have in terms of its utility. I think part of it is pedal to the metal on getting people safe drinking water, so we have the time to deal with this in a way that is also sensitive to the economics in the agricultural community.
I'm in agreement 100%. I think there has to be prioritization based on risk. You know, if you've got a large community that's utilizing this well network, let's protect that wellhead. You know, if there's an ecological receptor and we've documented that there's something that requires need, I mean, it's what I guess the main point is that from that type of industry, from, you know, hazardous waste management, from landfill, et cetera, albeit there are some differences that are significant, it looks like there are so many tools that we can borrow and engage from those types of industry.
You wouldn't want to, you're not suggesting replicating that,
no,
but just learning from it.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you, that's helpful. Yes,
Yeah,
Dr.
I'd like to address a number of points. The reason we didn't bring up some of those things is a lot of the items that he's learned about, we have a lot of direct experience with. I've been working with soil. I was a partner in a firm that did about 100,000 acres a year in irrigation scheduling. I mean, we have, if you want to ask a question about a soil sensor, soil moisture sensor, if you want to know about, you know, what you really get out of them, if you want to see published papers on the topic, the problems with distribution uniformity, the problems with getting a decent answer, I've got them. I don't just read about it, I've written about it. And if you want to talk about mapping soil salinity, no sweat. Been involved in lots of studies like that. Most of these are totally impractical. That's why we didn't waste our time on them. For example, let's say Paramount Farming, one of the largest farms in California, they went down that route of all these sensors and that. They just more or less have thrown them all away. You want to talk about telemetry and that sort of thing? I have 3 people working full-time in our center on nothing but telemetry. Would I recommend it for this? No way. Totally impractical. And that's a big part of our business, you know. So, yeah, we didn't talk about those things because they're just, they're not in the game.
Can you, I have to go back and read. I mean, I've skimmed stuff, but why are they totally impractical? All of them, everything.
Well, to set up some type of a monitoring,
that invites this kind of comment.
Just for example, let's say you want to monitor this push thing talking about for soil salinity. You want to see the variability in soil salinity on drip irrigated trees, for example. We have reports on that. It's all over the place. It's all over the place. Plus, you don't push a probe down more than a couple of feet. This push probe thing, it's a yeah, it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you much. Well, it gives you an answer, sure. But then here's the rule on soil moisture sensors. If you want the right answer, make sure you only use one, because if you put 2 in, you're going to get a totally different answer. You want to take a look at a flux and how things move down. You got to realize that even putting the sensor in, for example, disturbing the soil, putting the wire in, you've created preferential flow. The sensor will analyze about this much area around it. I used to work extensively with neutron probes. They measure something about the size of a football. I mean, there are really limits on these things. And it isn't, you can get really distracted by this stuff and stay away from what you really need to do, and that's farm well. These things, they're all helpful. Anything can be helpful. But you don't set a program around these things. We've had demonstrations of aerometers. I mean, you name it. We've had demonstrations and millions of dollars spent on that stuff, and you don't see them solving the world's problems. You know, it's kind of bizarre. People go to trade shows and they read journals about these things. You
I'd like to address two of those.
Let's do that. I don't want to get into an
Sure,
argument, though,
okay.
but go ahead.
All right.
I mean, I think the all or nothing on either side is not as useful to us
Right.
as actual stuff.
Well, this,
So that's my only feedback,
Yeah.
is that helping us think it through and acknowledging some of the issues that Mr. Rogers raised and others is, we actually are looking for some thinking partners. Some of it we have to do ourselves, but all or nothing isn't as helpful to us right now.
right, it all falls in a management plan. That's where it falls in. The use of those types of things, if they're appropriate, would fall into a water management program.
Okay, so that's what you're saying, as opposed to us legislating a particular
Oh, yeah,
regulation.
yeah, and
That I
setting up
understand.
some huge monitoring thing. It would be a waste of your money.
Okay,
Closing comment.
yeah, I greatly appreciate those comments. They're not for every application, obviously. But I'll give you two examples of where it's extremely helpful and it could really make your job easier as well as the grower's job easier. Let's say you want to know the direction and the rate of groundwater flow. Some of these direct push tools give you hydraulic conductivity. Spatial distribution can be with interpolation with error, but at least you see a range and you know the maximum and minimum. All you have to do is look at water level after that with a water level sensor, and you can calculate the velocity and the direction of flow. That's extremely helpful for a lot of the things that we do in our world. Secondly, that example where you're looking at surface discharges. Again, if you've got nitrate sensors that are deployed in these discharge points, you could determine whether or not there's been a nitrate-laden discharge that might be ephemeral. It might not be there all the time. It might not be there by the time you get a crew mobilized to get up into the watershed. And I think I can definitely feel the sensitivity about regulations and regulator entities overseeing what's going on, and maybe, you know, that is fearful for me if I was a discharger. But at the same time, if we want to try to identify where the hot spots might be, this is a tool that works.
A tool, yeah, you have to weigh the casting the net of sensors everywhere on that particular issue compared to other things you could be doing with your time.
Exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to chime in just for 1 minute.
Just as long as it's not an all or nothing comment, then I'm
No,
fine.
it's not all or nothing at
That's
all.
why you're here. You're an expert.
So I love data. I'm very much fact-driven, and I love measurement of all sorts of processes. That's what I do for a living. One thing is, so in our report, we don't discard any of the things that were just presented to you in the presentation. If they're useful for a particular farmer to go about his business as part of a management plan, more power to him. Already, a lot of farmers take soil nitrogen probes, or are testing for soil nitrogen and residual organics in the ground and all sorts of different things. We thought it was inappropriate to recommend that. We did not see a technical basis to include those kinds of measurements on a large scale for a regulatory program. Also, one thing that's been really becoming apparent to me by working on both ends, both in academia, in office, and working with a lot of different dairy farms and other farmers together, is that the idea of measuring things on a farm become more and more appealing the farther away you are from the farm. The closer you are to a lab or a university, the more it sounds like, oh yeah, this makes totally sense. It's easy to put a flow meter on there and measure the flow and all sorts of kind of things. It is not true. Just one example. Let's talk about automation of measurement. We've had so many problems with vandalism where we actually built like steel and concrete structures, and so people would still shoot their way in and come with tractors. Just unbelievable loss of money. So I just would caution the idea that somehow we can fix this problem by massively deploying equipment and somehow being able to manage it over the web or automate stuff. It's just completely unrealistic.
Thank you. That was helpful. Next. Kenia Acevedo.
Good evening. Thank you for
evening.
allowing me to speak. Chair Marcus, members of the board. I'll limit my comments to the panel's recommendation regarding the monitoring of first encountered water, and their conclusion that it's problematic, expensive, inconclusive, and in general would require a diversion of resources from other important source control efforts. First of all, I kind of want to press the panel a little bit. I find that statement to be conclusory, and I did not find that it was substantiated throughout the extent of the report. Given the significance of that statement, I would have appreciated extensive documenting of how they reached that conclusion. This is particularly relevant to my work. I work with disadvantaged communities throughout the region, as you know, and shallow water, usually first affected, is disproportionately found in disadvantaged communities. And so I think my next comments are to kind of challenge this idea when Member Moore brought up the idea of San Lucas, which is a community that we represent, and it was disregarded as, so what? Yes, in some instances, land uses may directly affect drinking water in shallow wells. I find that completely problematic, and it comes from this very narrow perspective that was taken in the calls of the questioned of the panel. It's not to fault the members of the panel, but I find it really concerning because at the core of why we have these protections is to protect public health. And so it's really critical to take these recommendations with that grain of salt, and to acknowledge that there are some instances where overlying land uses, particularly farming, can affect drinking water directly and disproportionately affect underserved communities and disadvantaged communities. And I'd also like to highlight that apart from that consideration in any decisions you make coming forward, there's also legal requirements. There is a requirement that monitoring needs to take place to verify the adequacy and effectiveness of the conditions of any waiver. And I think it hasn't been disproven. It wasn't disproven here. In fact, it was acknowledged that shallow groundwater can be a good metric to determine whether any management practices were actually effective, whether effective management practices increase nitrate concentrations or decrease nitrate concentrations. That doesn't dispute the point that measuring the concentration of nitrates in shallow water can still be a good option to verify the adequacy and effectiveness of the order. And it's not mutually exclusive with trend monitoring. So I just want to emphasize the importance to, although this report was written within a vacuum per se, you should still take into consideration the effects on shallow water, and monitoring need not be mutually exclusive so that you could monitor shallow water as well as have trend monitoring over time. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, very thoughtful. I do think there are distinctions as we start to think about what we might do with it. One is the thing I mentioned before, which is drinking water is the highest priority, and that is not actually the question we asked the panel in general, and as I hope you've heard us, that is our highest priority in terms of looking at these. The broader question about how you look at reducing practice and not creating the legacy, that's more challenging. I think we are going to have to sit there and focus on what are the good indicators. I think what I've heard today is we got to figure out what the right indicators for monitoring are. It can't be nothing. But it might not be shallow first encounter groundwater everywhere. It might be in some places, yes. So I think the answer is going to be it depends, but you flagged the right issues, so I thank you. And last, but definitely not least, Pearl Kahn from California Rural Legal Assistance. Now I can't even speak anymore. I am capable of listening, even though I can't form words. I just want you to know.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Pearl Khan, and I'm a colleague of Kenya Acevedo at California Rural Legal Assistance. And as Kenya mentioned, we represent disadvantaged communities who suffer from drinking water contamination, and we help them to try to find solutions to their drinking water problems. And as such, we interface a lot with our regional board, Region 3, and the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and working, very extensively to figure out kind of in the kind of chronology of things, how we can interface with this regulatory program to help protect groundwater quality as it affects groundwater that's the basis of drinking water for the Salinas Valley where we work. And so in terms of, just, I guess when I've attended the expert panels and reading the report, it talks about the concept of risk, and you touched upon this just briefly now, Chair Marcus, but they explicitly kind of divorce human health risks from their assessment of what risk means. And I think that the more we do that, and the less we associate the human health risk associated with drinking nitrate-contaminated water, and the whole point, I believe, the highest priority of SBX21 is why are we doing this? It's because it's a risk to public health. So, I think that this shouldn't just be an academic exercise, and this shouldn't just be an exercise that focuses solely on growers and growers' needs, but it should really kind of, we should really step back and look at the scale of the problem and not get so technocratic that we miss this huge, problem we face before us. And in terms of vulnerability index, you could say in some terms, according to some definitions, that the entire Salinas Valley is at risk. So instead of kind of figuring out what to do or what to define or how to define these things, we need to kind of figure out what's the outcome. And if the crux of the recommendations is to educate farmers, I'm not sure that's going to be leading to the kind of outcome that we really are looking for. There's been historical nitrate reports from the 70s, so it's not like we don't know about this problem. So I guess I'm just urging the board to, as you contemplate receiving this report, kind of where are we going with all of this? And where is the regulatory program? How is it going to lead us there? And my last final point is just regarding monitoring and coalition programs. So as we mentioned, in Region 3, there is a coalition groundwater monitoring program, and there's also an individual monitoring program. And in our experience, I think it's going to be very important to make sure that coalitions are facilitating accountability from growers and not prohibiting that from happening. So while coalitions can be really effective in helping growers comply with the regulatory program, they shouldn't be a vehicle to limit access to what would otherwise be public information. And I think that's a very real concern that we have, because a lot of times groundwater monitoring in our region, it monitors domestic wells, drinking water wells. So when, we can't access information from a public's point of view through the Public Rights Act, Public Records Act, that people are being notified that their domestic well exceeds nitrate levels and that they should not drink that water, that's a problem, that we can't figure that information out because of a coalition program. So that's the kind of, I think, the devil in the details regarding coalition programs and how they work out at the regulatory level. So I thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you. And there's a longer conversation to be had there that happy to have. We've had it in the past in the regulatory context, but happy to have it again in the future. Thank you for flagging that. I have a couple questions, but I know everybody's tired, but I want to turn to my colleague.
You can go.
Well, no, I have I'm sorry, at the risk of belaboring some points. The vulnerability you mentioned that you didn't like the NHI and that it didn't tell you anything. Do you think there's no value to any vulnerability assessment? I mean, it is a way to prioritize this work. I would agree with you that an across the board of almost anything is probably overkill. But the idea that you can't do any targeted monitoring, et cetera, also seems overly hands-off. So are there any ways to assess vulnerability that you would think are valuable?
Well, in the report, well, you saw the comments about like, why not add, you know, stuff like that. It's an easy way to make maps, okay. But in the report, we said that, well, if a coalition has to get started somewhere, let's say on educational efforts, okay, with all its warts and problems, it is something, you know, to get started with. Okay, so we did not totally discard it. And of course, in answer to your question, is anything always no? Of course, I have to say no, you know, okay, but anyway, bingo. But
It's meant to be a trick question.
yeah, in the end, we think that reporting of the AR ratio, although it takes some time to get it going, that really nails it pretty closely. You can see where the big numbers are, and that's the direct reporting. See, it's not indirect. That's what we
No,
thought.
You are asking for a lot there. That's true.
Pardon?
No, you are asking for a lot there.
With that AR?
Yeah.
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 I'm not sure if I understood that.
Right, no,
Correct.
my question was whether there would ever be a situation in which you could, I'm trying it another way, in which you could envision more enhanced monitoring because of the nature of depth to groundwater, historic use, et cetera, the kinds of things that the coalitions are trying to look at, proximity to surface water bodies, et
Yeah.
cetera, proximity to drinking water. It just seems, I'm just grappling
Sure,
with
yeah.
that, there not being a way to do that makes some common sense.
Here's the thing. It's kind of a question of, is the emphasis on that going to distract the people from really getting to the core issue, which is how much you're putting on versus how much you're removing. That's really the core issue. In other words, we know that has an impact. There are all kinds of other questions, like is it ever possible to bring aquifers back to reality, you know, I mean, to good levels? We didn't address that, you know, we weren't asked to. We're saying if you want to get at it, what do you measure? And I think, this is more from a personal standpoint, there was an underlying feeling that I had at least, that there's a certain amount of resources available. And you can get really distracted on things that are interesting and that might even be helpful. So it's always a question of, you know, how do you focus? How's that? So there are a lot of other things that could be of interest, and I mean, we didn't nail them all, but we try to really focus on what we
The most
thought
important.
down the road would really benefit everybody.
That's helpful. I keep thinking about city slickers.
So, of course, I have something to say again.
Yes, please.
So I was a little bit, so about vulnerability, and this also ties into a comment that Ms. Khan, I think, the last speaker, made. It surprised me a little bit that she was concerned about the fact that we separated out risk of human health versus other risks. I thought our discussion of that was actually very good and helpful. Because if you want to address risk to human health by ingesting high nitrate concentration water, that's very easily done. You have well data from domestic wells, or at least, from water supply wells, and if you don't have it, you could get it fairly easily. So there's no other monitoring that you need to do. You can get a sample out of that well and know it's high nitrates, we ought to do something about it. And that should be done. We're actually saying that should be done. But that does not help the problem of the problems that need to be solved on the fields. So that's all for right now. Thanks.
Thank you. Darren, next steps.
Well, certainly, so we've got a lot to look
Sure.
at here and people to talk with about the report. And I'll just remind everybody again that, you know, we didn't take formal comments on the final report. We did our comments, and the folks were focused on the draft. And so we can do that. We can digest it and bring it back to the board with some kind of recommendation if that's a desirable path to take.
Well, that might be good. We might want to ask follow-up questions or different things, either with the expert panel or in other ways to go. I mean, there's a range of directions to go. We've just had a relatively short session on what is actually a very dense topic.
Yes.
And
So,
report.
so you're not recommending we receive the report?
No, definitely receive the report so I can pay the contract and release these guys. They, you know, I should comment that I guarantee you none of them knew what they signed up for. They've stuck it out beyond what the compensation we gave them for sure to do this. So, and I didn't expect all of them to come today. That they did, and so that's I do appreciate that. That shows their dedication, and I think their dedication to this field and their interest in, you know, this problem we face, all of us face. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention one other person, of course, working behind the scenes. Staff Ashley Zelmer helped me probably do more of this than anything, so she should get credit as well.
Thank you.
I have a few things to say. Well, first of all, it just strikes me that maybe one of the challenges is tone. And in the draft, I was kind of struck by the tone. A lot of comments about what can't be done, what doesn't work. And I found that the final is vastly improved in that it makes recommendations. And I really appreciate, coming from the ag community, one thing that didn't come out from, you know, the commenters here tonight is that there's a whole world out there that won't like what's in here from the ag community, because we're asking a lot. And one of the things that you do recommend is that we don't just focus on high-risk areas, we focus on everywhere, because there's a lot of areas out there that eventually may become high-risk areas where those nitrates are slowly finding their way into the water table. So, and those folks, they're not focused on this at all. So this is going to be a whole new world for them. And I appreciate Board Member Spivey Weber, you know, the comment about education. It's easier said than done. But this is something that I feel very strongly about. I really appreciate sort of this professionalism of the crop advisors and getting more education, more robust education. Right now, those crop advisors really do focus on agronomics and not as much on water and other factors. And I think that what eventually is going to drive this is cost. And that information that growers get from certified crop advisors oftentimes results in cost savings because they're putting less nitrogen on, they're putting less water on. And so the human element, and I really do appreciate what the EJ community is bringing up, there's that human element of those that are impacted by this. And the quickest way to address that human element is to look at the human element on the ag side and to get them to a place where they are motivated. And I really think that this report, although it may not be as broad as the whole fix, right? We're not looking at, we didn't ask you to put together a regulatory program that can pass legal muster. There's a lot more to this than what's in this report. But I think that it's a very good, it's well focused in terms of making a change, because you keep going back in the report to what's going to make the difference. So having said that, what I would like to see is when staff comes back, maybe helping to put it into context. We've got the task force report. We've got the expert panel report. We have an order that's out at Region 3, some orders that are coming up on 5. I don't know to what extent they can all be, you know, because I know there's restrictions on, you know, what all we can talk about. So, but to help just put it into context, also we've got the report to the legislature from a few years back, maybe taking a look at that again. We don't want it to collect too much dust. Now that we have the task force report and the expert panel report, go back and maybe look at the report to the legislature and see if there's anything else that can be gleaned from that in order to maybe give, you know, a more comprehensive report when you come back. And the last thing I want to say, Darren and Ashley, thank you so much. I was at, I watched some of these, but also I was here a couple of times when you pulled together the advisory committee, and really do appreciate your dedication all the way through the process. And thank you to the expert panel members. Thank you very much for all the time that you spent on this, and commitment, and getting us a product in short order.
Just an add-on comment, and I just want to be real brief with this, but another driver to this whole thing, as a grower, that I will tell you that's going to happen is the end user's demands.
Yeah.
That will continue to drive this idea of continued certifications, and it's not going to end. I constantly get that. You name the commodity, it's coming up every time, where we have to prove and reprove what we're doing out in the fields. And what I'm hoping is that this, when it comes to fruition, will help with some of that process in saying, here I am, I'm certified, this is what I've done, and it'll solve a lot of those answers and questions that I get about a commodity or a crop. So just once again, another driver I think is going to help this whole process along the education, and why growers will also have a buy-in for that point of education as well.
Exactly.
Well, that's great. I just wanted to offer a couple of thank yous, to the panel. I know it was an extraordinary effort, and I want to second Board Member Diadamo's appreciation of your commitment to respond to the comments, and really what I think furnish us a very useful, practical guideline for moving forward. I personally, just as one board member, would like to see us transmit this report when it is final form, Darren, to the regions. Just in fulfilling of SBX 2.1 and our recommendations that we stand behind this. And so I would move that we receive the report. Make a motion.
I second that.
And then I would just like to really thank, a lot of very thoughtful input on this. I know it's late, but I don't care, because this is so historically important in terms of nitrate management in a global context. And I've said this before in different forums, if you look at the National Geographic from May 2013, you get a nice map of the nitrate challenges on Earth, in terms of China, India, and different parts of the globe. California is one of those places because of our productive agriculture. We have this neat opportunity, through the work of the Ag Expert Panel and other learned folks throughout, agriculture and academia and regulatory partners, and of course the EJ community, to push the envelope of what it means to grow food in a sustainable way, And so this is a wonderful opportunity working in California. I just want to thank everyone for contributing to that. I appreciate that last comment about, the driving forces, what the consumer expects and how we can build on that expectation to show how California agriculture, the food you eat here, in the long term is not contributing to an ongoing degradation, which is a global matter. And we're finding ourselves pretty far out front in addressing it. It's very complex. So thank you for this significant contribution. And yes, my motion's on the table.
And we have a
Thank-
second.
Well, I'll add my thanks to those of my colleagues, but have to say that I'm looking forward to moving on to the next item and having Mr. Howard read his executive director's report in its entirety to us tonight.
I put it to music, actually.
Yeah, really. We were hoping that you would dance it in an interpretive way.
Also,
And
I'm
you have
sorry.
a PowerPoint?
Forgive me. The monitoring issue was substantive today. We went back and forth on it. I want to just really acknowledge Ms. Acevedo's comment. You said it better than I can, which is I don't see that the long-term monitoring proposals in this report are exclusive to targeted, local groundwater monitoring efforts. That makes sense, as Region 5 tried to describe, I thought, And so I think this is a solvable issue within the language of the report. That's my optimistic opinion, and we can continue to work toward that.
Thank you. Yeah, an important piece of the puzzle, and thank you all for all your time and thought, and for everybody else who came and stayed. This is an evolving conversation within a community, whether you feel you're part of it. You are the same community as we try and figure this out, and it's not the beginning, it's not the end. It's an important conversation and an important contribution. I appreciate that, and we'll need to be thinking about it and figuring out how to integrate it into our thinking and next steps. So. My appreciation to everybody as well. So I have a motion and a second and some fine comments from many. All in favor of receiving the report?
Aye.
Oppose? All right, the report is received. We're not going to do the executive director's report. I know you're crushed.
I mean, ever, or are we deferring it to tomorrow?
We're deferring it to tomorrow.
Because I actually have 2 comments on it.
We will do it tomorrow at the end of the day. But I have a logistics question that I need you all here to ask. We had said we would go into closed session at the end. I think people are pretty tired. A suggestion has been made that we come back at 8 tomorrow morning, and I need to ask. I'll ask you guys too. I'm asking him first because I don't know if he's staying or going home.
You mean 8 p.m.
8
tomorrow?
a.m.
Oh.
for the closed session.
Yeah, I'm staying.
Can you do that? Can you guys do 8 a.m.? Can you do 8 a.m.? Okay. So we've adjourned till tomorrow's closed session continuation at 8 a.m. Do I need to say anything else, Janine? In 2:30. We are recessing this hearing, and then we will reconvene the closed session, and then we will reconvene this session. Thank you. Very interesting day.
I've been in that situation. I can visualize you getting my email. I don't have it, but there is one behind.
I hope not. I hope not. We're done, Bob. Thanks.
It's a little different, but yes. Sure. Well, that's so exciting. Maybe it's no, I don't think so. All right.
That's the direction we're going.
Completely.
How do we go about doing that?
And how long has it been? No. Yeah. Are you going home? Oh, of course, yeah.
You know, it's like red flag, You're beside me,
Right, that's right.
Lyndon,
Yeah, right, I think, oh, God. Anyway, I gotta get out of here, see you guys.
talk to you later. No, you know, you're right, and I like I say, good job, good job. How you doing?
Harry's gonna tap you on the stuff now.
Okay.
It's like free labor for the dude.
Free favor. I'm sure I'm gonna kind of reiterate some of this too, but as we sit there.
Oh, yes, you guys have two offices, right? But she's pretty crazy. She's a new partner. Yeah. Yeah. She's gonna hire a little, a new Abby, like a Abby in training.
I met him, but I can't repeat.
Yeah. Tell Kay and what's her name, who's the other one who comes from Lake Tahoe? Darlene.
We know it's not Tom or Tim. I'm terrible. It takes several iterations for me to get it. I got it.
I need to look up what
Yeah, and I think, we've not, so it is a bit perplexing.
$10 to apply for the SWEET program. State water, state water, energy enhancement plan. State water.
Don't ask me that.
This one's going to be $150.
It's an interesting question.
Cost matching and putting in irrigation.
You approached it from.
I saw that come down. You have 5 million to spend. And we're going to keep it going. So.
No, okay, I'm on,
Right?
I'm on your list, I get all your announcements, yeah,
Okay, good.
but I'm a little behind right now. You know what?
So they honestly know what to do with it.
We'll come up with the news release, so if anything is that you have solar this,
Okay.
that will be.
I will.
Okay.
Good to see you.
I'll tell you that. How do we, because it's a weird cross-up. Well, and then the trust in kind of our academic structure. We're from the school of ag, but we're like engineering side versus the whole other side. It's strange. And in that program, in fact, I worked on the modular irrigation irrigation. There's a whole hour that we devote just to irrigation management. I think there's 6 modules on the first day, and then we go into the second day, which is a half-day program that focuses either on the perennial or the annual crops. So there's curriculum developed for that as well, and we're annotating notes and getting that prepared and thinking about, how do we use some of these materials as sort of at least some component of the standard materials that trainers might use now to do some of the grower training. So we're evolving ideas about how we, and again, this is the coalitions are involved in this as well, and they've got proposals in there. So, the problem with the guy from the university, he's got various constituencies. You kind of almost need to wait for somebody to come forward and say, this is what we need, as opposed to being the guy. And I know what we've heard from the board. Well, give us a proposal, kind of thing, and then we'll respond to that. But it does make it a little bit difficult when you're, to propose something that maybe it might in some ways maybe be seen as a conflict with another group that might propose. Well, we've always done in the past. We did this in stormwater. So eventually there was 2 paths where they developed kind of cooperation with what we could sanction as a program and certification program. They never said that we should write to it. What we end up saying is like, this one works, and someone else comes along that connects this or connects us to this. Yeah, a big part of that too. Developing that first one. I would take a lot of years to put it out. It started with community manuals that they would write with contract manuals, and so we thought we could just we would ship these out, right? And we did make many more.
Nothing process, I had a pretty good idea, but I was really helpful. Really happy.
We drive up to sites for stormwater, you see still okay, well, I got them parallel, but if they miss the hole, they gotta be flat line, you know, it's like, so, you know, little subtleties that eventually you say, well, we need someone to test them and make sure they got all the concepts going on. That was definitely, I'm not quite sure the way they're working on it.
I didn't realize some of the things it said, they're right, you know, it says that.
So I'm happy to play a role.
Yeah, and that'll probably be the request. I think you'll get some done fairly soon. We're trying to get them some meeting dates for, I think, late October, first November.
Accurate,
To
you
have
step back and
just
you
a
look
little
at
bit of
your red.
discussion in the area, so we know kind of where we're at with things too. And, you know, I think basically, we're pretty good on what we've been.
Do you remember this discussion that took place and that we talked about?
There's other
But the writing
kind of things
across
moving
is very
forward
negative,
that,
very anti
you know,
this,
it seems
anti
like
that.
we're being
This doesn't
seen
work.
ahead. So what do we, how do we handle the coalition proposal, and that was sort of a rough draft proposal? You know, how is that our boards or our groups, you know, our responsibility? I don't think we feel like it's, you know, we don't want the responsibility. It's like, nobody's really said this is a group other than the group that's organizing materials for.
Thank you, Tex.
And putting the trainings on.
Because you know what? I'm not. All right.
And if education is gonna be a central component.
Well, yes, it is.
I think, you know, the University of California, you know, is ready to continue to move forward with.
No, I'm sure.
All partners.
At least we had an extension program that's got some legs to it, as well as some of the coalitions.
Huge responsibility. We're talking about data that's unbelievable. People don't get this data we're talking about.
Farmers now out there, farmer wise, that
It seems like the next step is, okay, what's gonna meet the market for certification, if there's gonna be a certification process. Those kinds of fundamental questions. Is there gonna be a test or is there not? You know, if the growers are gonna have a lesser requirement, why is that? And there's, you know, we talked about that a little bit. You know, I think there's.
yeah, so we didn't face that as stormwater, because they're already consultants, they're all developed. So we say, hey, we got to add this part of concrete.
First time we just talked about some really basic